Hey, bro, you just got traded to the Kings.
You was dead at me?
You did.
Me?
Yes, you.
It's over. It's over. It's over.
Hello and welcome to today's draft day recap. Or rather draft days, because, well, the draft this year is 2 days, and both days went a lot longer than they normally would, which on one hand, it is nice that teams had more time to work out trades, but the actual watch time and the presentation, the structuring was far from ideal. And it doesn't help that it had the usual quirks that the NBA does when it comes to their draft day decisions. Speaking only in terms of the draft overall, it was awkward, and I do think that the NBA is going to have to tweak this format a little bit more in order to make it make sense for all parties involved, because this is a really big night for a lot of these guys, and as you saw with guys like Sar and Buzelis, it means a lot for them to hear their name called, and it can be really emotionally devastating for them to have to essentially wait an entire almost 24 hours. The point is, it's far from perfect. What was perfect, or at least close to perfect, is the Toronto Raptors draft night. They were incredibly active, especially on the second day, and they got some absolute steals in this draft. Let's start with their first overall pick, or 19th in this case, Jacoby Walter. To give you a short summary, because I did talk about him in a previous video, Jacoby Walter is a two-way wing with some serious shot-making abilities. His form looks great, he plays with a lot of tenacity on defense, and he does have a 6'10" wingspan, which is always a bonus. And it's a very Raptors thing for them to draft a wing who has said length. Yes, his efficiency in Baylor wasn't great, but he was asked to step up and be the first option for said team, asked to take a lot of difficult shots, and he's certainly capable of making it, and the fact that he's willing to take those shots, those difficult moments, and step up, that's a great mentality to have. But I will say that he is probably going to have a more limited role on the Raptors, at least for the foreseeable future, and thus his efficiency should probably be a lot better than it currently is. The main concerns that he has are that his handle, it's not great, or at least not as good as you'd want for your two guard to be when they're putting the ball on the floor. And it did lead to a couple of careless turnovers, though again, him being the first option on Baylor, he was given a lot more attention on the defensive end. The more major concern is that his finishing is, well, sub 50%, and that's something that he is going to need to work on. So yeah, there's a reason why he did fall to 19, even though I would argue that he was the best player on the board at that point. Yes, I like Yves Missi too, but to be perfectly honest, this is a great pick for 19th overall. He's gotten a lot of comparisons to Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and for the 19th overall pick, if that's the outcome that you get, you take that and run. And if he becomes even better than that, that's an absolute steal, and if nothing else, it does make the Pascal trade seem a lot better than it currently does. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll touch on that trade later. Love the pick, great value, makes a lot of sense for the team right now, especially considering that we have no idea what's going to happen with Gary Trent Jr., who is presumably going to be the 5th starter, question mark? For now, let's talk about the other piece of the OG Anunoby trade that everybody seems to have forgotten about. The Pistons' second that they received that became Jonathan Mogbo. I also talked about him in the previous video, so here's the TLDR. Great rebounder, great defender, excellent playmaker for his position, and the advanced stats absolutely adore him. This is a guy who is 6'6" without shoes, and he finishes like a traditional big man at the rim. And his work ethic? Exquisite. He made a lot of improvement compared to his previous season. He is the definition of a Raptors pick. He isn't necessarily going to space the floor out, but he's a very Draymond-like small ball 5 who is probably going to be playing a lot of time at one of the wing positions, if not being a full-time backup 4 for the team, because they're kind of lacking right now for wings. For the 31st pick overall, that is an excellent choice. If the Toronto Raptors came out of this draft with only Jonathan Mogbo and Jacoby Walter, that'd be a perfectly fine draft day, or draft days in this case. But surprisingly, despite them only entering into this draft with 2 picks, they made 4 selections. They also got rid of Jalen McDaniels and managed to make use of that $10 million exception that they got from the Siakam trade, which, honestly, very surprising. The Raptors don't have a great history when it comes to using their trade exceptions. The one that they got for Bosch that was, I think, $19 million or so, completely wasted. The one that they got from the Goran Dragic trade, completely wasted. The fact that you were, seemingly, able to resolve the backup point guard position with this move, and got another pick in this draft, that is an absolute masterclass. It is an excellent use of the team's resources, and given that this technically does tie into the Pascal Siakam trade, it does make it seem a lot better than it was initially. Like, the fact that they turned Pascal Siakam, an all-NBA player, into what looked like it was going to be an absolute dreadful return. Getting Davion Mitchell, Ochai Agbaji, Kelly Olynyk, Jacoby Walter, you got rid of Jalen McDaniels and Otto Porter Jr., a 2025 Portland second, and a future first from the Pacers, granted it's top 4 protected, and they're probably going to be pretty good unless there's something that just goes completely awry out of the Memphis Grizzlies this season. Still don't know what's going to happen with Bruce Brown. It makes the trade look a lot better than it did on the day that the trade took place. Now granted, I don't think anybody's going to be saying that the 45th overall pick is the difference between the Pascal Siakam trade being great or good, but the fact that they were able to get anything out of Jalen McDaniels, not having to give up picks to get rid of him. The fact they were able to get Sash, I'm not even going to try pronouncing that last name, but he's a good shooter, can play the 4, might just be a buyout, he might go back to play in Europe, but we'll see what happens. The fact that you were able to make use of a very small trade exception, and it is small, all things considered, it is nowhere near as large as the one that the Atlanta Hawks got from the John Collins trade, or rather John Collins salary dump, and you got what is probably going to be one of the most valuable picks in the second round for next year's draft, which is looking like a stacked draft class, and you got another pick in this draft that's honestly pretty noteworthy and deserves to be praised. Though, it does make you wonder what they could have done if they had actually traded Pascal Siakam earlier, but let's not really litigate that. Like, Davion Mitchell is straight up a better player than Jalen McDaniels. Yes, he plays a different position, but relative to his position, he's a better defender than Jalen McDaniels is. His shooting is a mixed bag. He had a really hot streak to end the season. He was shooting 40% from 3, though on low volume. And whether or not he's going to be able to replicate that same success in Toronto remains to be seen, but the fact that you were able to take a flyer on him, all of that for Jalen McDaniels and that trade exception from the Pascal Siakam trade, absolutely sublime. And the 45th pick overall in this draft, Jamal Shead, is an intriguing player in his own right. The Defensive Player of the Year from last year, and he's barely 6 feet tall. His shooting has some question marks, but he's a great finisher at the rim, and if nothing else, he's that high character sort of player that this front office absolutely loves to add to its roster. Whether or not he becomes the full-time backup point guard, that remains to be seen. It's probably going to be Davion and him duking it out for that position. But the fact that the Raptors are even going to have this sort of dilemma for its bench is a refreshing change of pace after the absolutely dire state that the bench was in the past few seasons. You're going from Thaddeus Young and Otto Porter Jr., who basically never played for the Raptors, to a respectable ball handler and great point of attack defender in Davion Mitchell, both great options, and both are probably going to get a lot of minutes to start the season. So yeah, terrific selection at 19, great one at 31, 45 could be an absolute steal, but they didn't stop there, because at 57, they made a trade with the Timberwolves in order to acquire Ulrich Chomche, who I'm probably mispronouncing because, again, I'm very bad at pronouncing names, even when I've heard it multiple times. Anyway, Chomche is a very interesting player, although he is a bit of a project. He has a lot of potential as a stretch 5 who can do a little bit of playmaking, though he does turn the ball over more than he does dish out dimes. He's 6'11", extremely athletic, and he has a 7'4" wingspan that makes him incredibly intriguing as a two-way stretch 5, although that does come with a bit of a caveat because, how do I describe this? You know how Gary Trent Jr. is, statistically speaking, one of the better three-point shooters when you consider his season-by-season averages, but when you watch him game to game, you know he can be very hot or cold? Yeah, it's the same thing with Chomche. He's not necessarily a bad shooter, but he is incredibly streaky. He has arguably the highest, if not the second highest after Khalil Ware, ceilings of all the center prospects in this draft. There's a lot to like about the tools that he has at his disposal, but while the ceiling is incredibly high, the floor is pretty low overall. He's probably going to be spending a lot of his time, if not the entire season, in the G League, barring injuries of course, and that might carry over to the next season. He is very raw, the definition of a boom or bust prospect, but given the low entry, literally the second last pick in the draft, and the fact that you probably didn't give up a whole lot to get him, it seems like they only gave up cash to the Timberwolves. That is a flyer absolutely worth taking. Whether or not he pans out, that remains to be seen, but it is absolutely a bet on the Raptors' ability to develop their players. And not just him. Jacoby, Jamal, Jonathan, all of these players have their own respective issues. their own flaws that they do need to work out. If even one of these 4 players manages to pan out, regardless of whether or not they're a starter, bench player, all-star, etc., that would be a success in my book. If you're able to get multiple hits, that would be an incredible outcome for a draft that many were deriding before heading into it. And it would be a testament to the Raptors' ability to develop players, something that they haven't really done in a long time. Yes, Scottie Barnes has improved year over year, and Grady Dick did start to look a lot better throughout the last season. However, the team's direction, or lack thereof, was on full display. Now, they've chosen a direction. They've chosen to retool around Scottie Barnes. And them building themselves up back through the draft, the thing that made them such a powerhouse to begin with during the DeMar and Lowry years, that's exciting. That's something to be optimistic about, both for the next season and the seasons to come. This is the first time that I've been truly optimistic about this team in quite some time, and regardless of what happens next season, I'm incredibly excited to see this new core develop, and in general, see this new culture build around Scottie Barnes as the face of the franchise. This front office has made a lot of missteps in the past few years, but the fact that they have chosen to stick to this direction, to bet on their development process, that's a refreshing change of pace from the past few years, despite the stumbling that it took to get to this point. All of this is to say that the Raptors' draft day decisions all around deserve an A. Excellent selections, excellent trades, again, getting rid of Jalen McDaniels and getting assets out of that, technically out of the trade exception, but I digress. With free agency starting in a couple of days, and with the decision needed to be made on Bruce Brown's team option, as I'm recording this it's only a day away, it's going to be interesting to see how this team looks after the offseason. But until next time, game on my friends.